Hey everybody, can you hear me? Maybe? Well, put on the headsets now. Time to go. My timer just started. Cool. So my name's Tony Nguyen. I'm a data and analytics consultant for Amazon Web Services. Can you guys hear me? Thumbs up? Thumbs up? Great, thank you. So show of hands, who here is actually really interested in choosing the right database for their workloads versus just kind of figuring out how to migrate? Who here is actually more interested in the migration process, trying to figure out how to migrate things en masse, migrate 100 to 1,000 databases? Okay. And who here has actually successfully migrated a database to the cloud? Interesting. So I want more hands up after this presentation. Hopefully, maybe in a year, I can see these smiling faces again. So there are some related sessions that I do want to talk about, specifically for those of you who are interested in kind of the workflow, the process, how to do things in the right way. So you'll notice that none of these are actually very technically focused, and that's on purpose, right? There's plenty of sessions out there that talk about what's the specific best practices around migrating SQL Server or migrating Oracle or migrating any kind of database to Amazon. But what people really need help with, I found, is a way to the best practices around kind of migrating at scale. And so all of these sessions will help with that. And now this session, what are you going to expect? So you're going to expect to see things around how databases in Amazon really help you as opposed to on-prem or even other clouds. You'll get a sense of the volume and scale at which AWS operates and how various customers are using our services to do their workloads. You'll learn about the key considerations for choosing a database, how to assess your requirements, and how to map them to the right database. And you also kind of figure out what's next. You'll figure out, okay, what are my next steps? How can I get started? How can I accelerate my path to migrating databases to Amazon? So first, what's so special about databases at Amazon, right? Is it just any old database? Is it like just migrating a lift and shift kind of thing from on-prem to Amazon? And really, there's really good benefits to just moving to a cloud-based environment. So if you host your databases in EC2, right, you end up with a big difference between what you have on-prem. On-prem, you end up having to take care of all these things that you see on the left here. But if you move over to EC2, we take care of the OS installation for you, the service maintenance, the racking and stacking, the power HVAC, things like that. But you'll notice that there are still kind of things on the left-hand column that are undifferentiated heavy lifting tasks. And what I mean by that are tasks that really anyone can do, right? And it's stuff that's not special, stuff that doesn't really mean much to your business. It's just things that you have to do as a course of doing things in a tech world, right? And we don't want you to have to worry about that. We want you to focus on what's special about your business, your workloads, your mission. And how managed services in Amazon helps you with that is that we take care of all that stuff that you see on the right. And really all you have to care about is optimizing your applications, trying to figure out the best thing for your workload, trying to figure out, okay, how can I make things better for my end users? So let's talk about the database that's most appropriate for your workloads, right? So show of hands, who here has transactional kind of workloads? That's like something that's kind of fronted by a web app or something to that end. How about analytics workloads? Things that, oh, I want to figure out reporting, or I want to actually chew against huge data sets. Who here has kind of a mixture of them? Things where you don't really know which one it is yet, and you're kind of afraid to commit because that's a long and lengthy process. Okay, so let's go through that. So typically you can categorize databases into these kinds of common use cases. And if you look across the data categories, you'll find that each one of them kind of has a special way of modeling how data works. Each of them has a distinct purpose, and each of them kind of lends themselves well to a specific kind of use case. So for example, graph databases, right? Very useful for social networking. Time series, really great for fraud detection, things like that. And if you look at our offerings and how they kind of align to these categories, our database strategy is really, really simple actually. We want you to have the right tool for whatever you're doing. We don't really want to give you a one-size-fits-all kind of solution. You want a purpose-built database so that you don't have to sacrifice anything. You don't want to have to sacrifice on scale, performance, and functionality, because while one-size-fits-all databases are useful, and they have their place, what you really want is the right tool for the right job at the end of the day, right? When you're really pushing those boundaries, you want to be able to choose what's right for your workload. And I do want to take a short break from generalities, right? When we're talking about databases, people often fall into the trap of, okay, It's a structured database. It's an unstructured database. It's schema-free. It's a big data workload. That really doesn't help me or anyone else kind of quantify what I need to choose the right database. And let's dig into that a little bit more. So first, you got to think about the purpose of your database, right? What's it's doing, and then what your application actually requires. And this drills down even further into the actual data considerations. So you have shape to consider, you have size to consider, and you have compute to consider. And so when we're talking about shape kind of is along this kind of category here that you see, where you have row stores, column stores, key value stores, graph stores. Each one of these kinds of shapes have a particular use case and a particular workload that you can see there on the right-hand column where they're best suited. Next thing is to think about size, where you have, okay, I've kind of figured out what the data kind of feels like, but I have either a little bit of it or a lot of it. And it's not just about the total size of it as well, right? It's about how much data am I pulling when I'm querying my data sets? How much of it is actually partitionable? Is it very tightly coupled, or am I able to shard it across multiple databases? And then compute, right, which is actually one of the most interesting ones because that's the one where people kind of tend to focus on the most. How many IOPS do I need for my workload when I'm migrating? What's the compute do I need? What do I do a lot of aggregate functions? Am I doing a lot of joins? All these kinds of things are things you got to think about when you're considering a new database. And then there's also the temperature of the data. So is my data hot? Is it warm? Is it cold? And typically when you have cold data, right, that tends to be historical data, data that you want to maybe query every so often, let's say in the past 10 years. And when you have hot data, that's kind of the stuff that you're looking at like right now, right? And often there's a lot of blending sometimes, right? Sometimes you have data that can jump between hot and cold, warm and cold, but oftentimes is the case, these are the kinds of columns that you need to think about. And you see at the bottom, there's a cost associated with how you define these data categories. And these data characteristics kind of can be mapped to various storage options and in ways that you look at data, right? So you see that here you have HDFS, which can kind of span the warmish to the coldish, maybe a little hot, but oftentimes it's kind of in the middle. But if you need that kind of really fast, low latency kind of query, you tend towards more of the NoSQL style solutions. And this is how these kinds of temperatures map to various services that we have at Amazon. So you'll see here for maybe those really hot workloads, you can use Amazon Elasticache to get your queries really, really quickly. If you have kind of slower data, right, and you don't want to pay as much, you can look at Glacier or S3. And kind of mapping out your data temperature in this way really allows you to really choose the right database for the right job. I often fall into this trap here where I have a favorite database, right? Everyone has a favorite database. And it's really easy to be tempted into thinking, hey, this database, I can make it work for this workload, or I can make it work for this workload. But even though it's convenient and really sometimes useful to get really started in a fast manner by doing that kind of thing, you really want to avoid that. You want to avoid choosing one database when really you can choose multiple databases. The speed and agility that the cloud really provides allows you to experiment really, really quickly, iterate quickly. If I try this database, I don't like it or it doesn't suit my purpose, I can get rid of that, right? That ability to pay as you go, to provision on demand, really enables a lot of customers that I work with to experiment and iterate quickly in that manner. And our strategy, like I was talking about before, is giving you that sort of purpose-built database, that best tool for the job, in a way that's managed, where we take care of that undifferentiated heavy lifting for you, that's open, right? We want to avoid the old guard kind of style of databases where they kind of lock you into it. And a way that we kind of go about all of this is that we are customer obsessed. We listen to your feedback. Our roadmap actually only goes out a couple months because we actively pivot based on customer needs and demands. So please, if you have any requests or things that you really need to satisfy your workload requirements and Amazon doesn't provide it, let us know because we will pivot our roadmap for you. So going back over here, just as you get a refresher, what database should I actually choose right now, right? I went through a lot of that. And here's going to be a bit of an eye chart. But this is really based off of all those things I was talking about, where each one of our services maps. So for example, if you're looking at using DynamoDB, that's your quick key value stores, low latency. sorts of workloads. If you're looking at Neptune, right, that's your graph database kind of workload. I'll take the pictures. Good. So next one. So this is another one where we're looking at kind of the more either specialty kind of use cases or the more generic ones, right? So you see at the bottom, EC2 kind of covers everything, but then you have to worry about that management piece, right? Whereas if you use a service like Redshift, right, our data warehousing solution, it allows for you to actually move your, say, Netezza or Vertica workloads over to a similar solution while having all the stuff that you didn't really want to care about managed for you. So here's an example of how you can actually merge all these tools together, right? You don't have to choose one tool. So here you have Kinesis Analytics, which is our streaming service, which you can actually run SQL on top of to do in-flight SQL queries on demand. You have it pumped to Elasticsearch, right, for your non-SQL kind of non-SQL style analytics, while also piping it to Amazon S3 for cold storage and for data retention, and as just maybe the ground truth area for your data lake. After you put it in S3, you can have the well-modeled data be mapped over to Redshift, and stuff that's kind of ad hoc-y or things that aren't very modeled as well, or maybe you need to do kind of exploratory analysis, over to Amazon Athena. Here's another example where you can kind of migrate and merge these kinds of things together. So here we have your application being backed by Amazon Aurora, right? Which is comes in two flavors, MySQL and Postgres, and it's our answer to how we would create a database today rather than a database of the 70s. And the thing here that you'll see that's interesting is that Aurora actually has CDC being pumped into Redshift as part of the ongoing process when new data comes in, right? So what you can have here is that near-time analytics can all be kind of bashed into S3. And the use case here is that all your transactional kind of stuff and the faster OLTP kind of queries can be processed by Aurora, but your reports, your aggregate kind of queries can be done by Redshift. And that way you have tools that you can, services that you can kind of right size for the job, right? You don't have this one monolithic database that's doing both reporting and OLTP. You can right size your Redshift cluster such that, okay, maybe I only need to report every last day of the month, for example. You can spin up your Redshift cluster, do it then, and spin it back down. You're not paying the cost to have that thing sitting around all the time. So now that we've talked about all that kind of stuff, can I actually migrate my existing database? That's a common question. So here's a couple of things that you need to think about. And this is often the case for, say, Oracle workloads or MySQL or SQL Server workloads, things like that. You really got to think about COTS, right? Does my application rule out me being able to have it be sent over to a new database? Are there specific modules that I use that are going to prevent me from doing things that I want to do in the new database that I'm going to be choosing? Can it be refactored? Can it be ported? Does the application have a lot of PL/SQL that I'm going to have to refactor? Is the cost of refactoring worth the pain that I'm going to go through when I'm going to make this big move? You got to think about also license costs, productivity gains, how flexible my architecture is, and are there actual workload needs that are blocking me from taking advantage of another managed service such as RDS? And this isn't as uncommon as you would think, right? While it's very easy to say, oh, RDS will solve all my problems, there are use cases where RDS might not be the best fit. Let's say you have a custom module or you have a certain number of IOPS that you need to fulfill. There are a lot of considerations you have to kind of cover. And if you have none of these kinds of showstoppers, then go ahead. What's really useful, I think, is to kind of think of a sort of flowchart of how this all works. And I'll just go through it quickly in the interest of time. When you're kind of thinking about this kind of evaluation of moving a database over to another database, first thing you have to think about is, am I interested in staying with the kind of old guard database, or am I interested in staying or moving to a database that's more open, such as MySQL or Postgres? If the answer is no, right, I need to stay in Oracle for whatever reason. Let's say you're using Oracle Forms or something to that end, then you got to think about, okay, I have to use Oracle. What's my actual need? Do I need more than 64 terabytes? Is my kind of workload above that 80K apps that I was talking about before? If so, then RDS isn't the right fit for you. And then you have to look at EC2. If RDS is the fit for you, then by all means, go for it. But if you don't need to use Oracle, which I think is really exciting because that opens up a lot of possibilities, then you have to really kind of qualify the application, right? Can I actually move it? Is it portable? If it's not, right, then I have to think about a lot of work, right? A lot of work refactoring, a lot of work trying to figure out, okay, how am I going to move my custom stuff over to this new platform? And hopefully that kind of gives you an idea of the general kind of flow of how you would think about choosing and whether or not it's the right fit for you. So I've gone over that. Now, what kind of tools are available for me to help migrate and accelerate my migration over to Amazon? And there's a couple of options out there, right? The three ones on the right that you see there are the kind of common ones that are often used. And the two that are on the left are the ones that I think that you'll find the most interesting: the Database Migration Service, DMS, and the Schema Conversion Tool, SCT. And what they do are really, they are ways for you to speed up your migration onto Amazon. I'm going to go into detail about them right now. And what the general flow looks like is that the Database Migration Service is a thing that moves your data, moves your objects. The Schema Conversion Tool, which is a free application that you actually download on your client laptop, is the thing that actually analyzes your workloads, analyzes your target and source systems, figures out, okay, is this schema migratable? If not, what's the problem? Things like that. And I'll go into deeper detail about that later. But let's first talk about Database Migration Service in more detail. So what we did about Database Migration Service is really think about how can we help customers accelerate, right? Is there a way that we can make it cheaper and easier for customers to move their databases to the cloud? And to do so, we built DMS. And what it does is it helps you move your common databases such as Oracle, SQL Server, Sybase, DB2, things like that, over to Amazon. And to date, we've seen over 100,000 databases be migrated using DMS. And it really kind of makes it a lot easier to use versus choosing a vendor-specific tool or you choosing something that's kind of the old style of doing things. And we have a bunch of customers that use DMS. Because this is Public Sector Summit, you note on the bottom right that the VA actually uses DMS right now to migrate their 20-year Oracle database over to Amazon RDS in GovCloud with multi-AZ with little downtime. You'll see here that the Schema Conversion Tool that I was talking about before is this kind of client application, right? And you'll see on the left, that's the old source database, and on the right is Amazon Aurora. And you'll see that it shows you how you can migrate schemas over to your target database. It shows you how you can migrate your code over as well. It will do it for you. It automates all of this, so it will do schemas, views, indexes, synonyms, table sequences, as well as functions, packages, stored procedures, and triggers. There's a bunch of little tips and tricks that we can go into, such as being able to apply only the DDLs to tables and primary keys. You can save your secondary DDLs after your migration. You can do cool things like, okay, how fast do I want to do it? How slow do I want to do it? How much memory do you think it will take? Lots of little knobs and things that this tool will give you that make it really easy to convert your schemas over to your target database. And I think this is the coolest thing, especially because migrations is not just the technology, right? It's about process, it's about people. And being able to have this report to give to somebody that says, okay, this is the analysis that we did on your source and target database, and here, executives, this is the level of effort it will take for me to migrate my database over to the target database that I'm looking at. And these are the objects that can move, these are the objects that can't move, and this is why. It's really, really, really effective to just bring to leadership this kind of document and say, this is what I need to do. I talked a little bit about how SCT does that kind of conversion for you, the code conversion, and I can't stress how well it does this enough. It'll go through every single one of your schema and code objects and kind of just show you that mapping, the before and after, and show you, okay, if it can't do it, this is why, and this is what you should probably try to fix. So what are some migration best practices? So let's first talk about migration terms and types, right? We got to cover that part first. So first, there's lift and shift. So when we're lifting and shifting, that's moving your database from your source area over to AWS with as little changes as possible. And typically, that means that you're moving it over to EC2. Sometimes people use S3 to store the raw data or just the backup files, things like that. But oftentimes, people use lift and shift not as an end state, right? Lift and shift is being used as a way to first get my stuff into the cloud first because I have a data center closure, or I just need to do it, or someone's telling me I need to go to the cloud right now. And then after I move it to Amazon in this lifted and shifted way, the next step I want to do is optimize on that. I want to make it either more performant. Maybe I want to use RDS so that things are managed away from me. Maybe I want to try and use target database altogether. But lift and shift is really just throw the thing over to Amazon in the quickest and simplest way possible. Homogeneous migration is where you have your existing database engine, but you're moving over to, say, RDS or EC2. You're not shifting anything underlying. You might be going up a major version, but it's, to me personally, I consider that a heterogeneous migration just because of the complexity involved. And a heterogeneous migration itself is where you're moving to a completely different engine, or you're moving to something more managed. So for example, that does include, say, Oracle to Oracle RDS in a sense, right? Because while Oracle RDS makes things easier for you, there are certain caveats to that, right? So for example, you don't have super user access when you're using managed services like RDS. So if you're using processes today that depend on you having that kind of access, or your scripts today depend or assume that you have super user access, that's something that you need to kind of find a resolution for. And the RDS documentation goes through all of that. So they have a whole list of things and kind of equivalent functions that you can use to help get that going. Let's talk about the 4 or 6 R's of migration. I like to think of them as 4, but there are 6. So that's rehost, replatform, replace, refactor, retain, and retire. The last 2 are typically not options for a lot of people because as you're all sitting here today, you're probably thinking about the first 4, I hope. Otherwise, why are you here? So let's talk about rehosting, right? So rehosting is that lift and shift I was talking about, where you're just moving it to a different host. That's it. I'm done. Replatforming is where I'm lifting it over, but I'm kind of wanting to fiddle with some knobs and things here while I'm there because, hey, while I'm moving anyway, I might as well optimize. I might as well add more EBS volumes. I might as well RAID them together so I get high performance, things like that. Things that are primarily infrastructure changes. Maybe I want to move to something that's beefy like an X1 rather than the little Dell that I was using in my rack. Replace is where I'm dropping my current solution for either a better solution or something that's equivalent, right? But maybe the licensing costs are better, things like that. And refactor is that hardest one, right, that I was talking about before, when you're moving to a completely new target system and I have old things that I can't refactor easily, or there's things that don't port over as easily. That refactor part is the hardest one, but it's the one that often gives the most benefits, I find. When we're doing that kind of migration assessment as well, you want to think about things in kind of 3 different column areas. The technical side of things, the process kinds of things, and the personnel and tools sides of things. And what I mean by that is there are various things that come up during a migration that will be called blockers, right? So for example, from the technical side of things, right? If I'm moving over from my source database to my target database and I find that, hey, I actually need geospatial functions, or hey, I'm actually using Oracle RAC, this rules out a lot of options for you, right? And so these are things that you need to mark right away at the start of your migration because they will come up. And if you forget about them, you start migrating and then you find out, oh, my target database actually did not support geospatial functions. I did all this work for nothing. You're gonna be in a pickle. If we're talking about processes, right, we gotta think about what's your internal process for migration today? What do you need to change to make it cloud friendly? Are there major blockers to rapidly iterating, right? In the typical old kind of style of migrations, it's a kind of very waterfall-y model, right? There's not much iteration. You're not in a position where I can drop this database that I'm working on now and spin up a different kind of engine on the fly like you can in a cloud environment, just because that's not how things were done in the past. So if you need to make changes to your processes to make your migration smoother, you need to mark those down as soon as you can. And then also personnel and tools. Do I have licenses for Golden Gate, right, if I'm using Golden Gate? Do I have the appropriate personnel? Do I have people who know about AWS at all? Do I have people that know how to set up a VPC in Amazon? If I don't have those people right now, those need to be identified as soon as possible so that you can acquire the right resources for your migration. You don't want to be in a position where you're ready to go, but no one has actually set up the AWS account yet. That's a terrible position to be in because then you're making everyone wait just for that process to be started. The workload qualification framework is a really easy way for you to kind of scope this out, right? When we're talking about a single database or maybe even 10 databases, it's kind of straightforward. This database is kind of hard, this database is easier. But when we're talking about 100 or even 1,000 databases, there needs to be a quantifiable way for you to figure out, okay, this database is one of the hardest ones, it's the largest one that we have, but it's maybe not the most important one to migrate first. You want to kind of do the low-hanging fruit first when you're migrating for a couple of reasons. The most important one being, when you first migrate a database into Amazon, you're going to learn new things. You're going to run into issues, you're going to run into challenges. But every time you do this, right, you get better and better and better at it. And it's kind of establishes a kind of flywheel where you're learning and improving, people are putting things into Confluence, you're building this bedrock of expertise that you can use on that more difficult migration. So let's talk about the two different kinds of database workloads when we're looking at the WQF. You have your OLTP workloads and your data warehouse / OLAP kind of workloads. And the WQF doesn't really care about these, incidentally. People will often kind of diverge the conversation and say, hey, this is actually an analytics database, or hey, this is actually a very simple transactional database. You should not care about that. What you should care about is the actual features and the characteristics of the underlying database itself. Because that kind of is really what separates the lighter database workloads from the harder ones. So for example, category 1 database workloads. These are workloads that can be kind of done in maybe a day or maybe a couple of days, where it's just a very, very lightweight database. It has no custom code, it has no functions, it has no store procedures, it's something really dumb. Category 2, maybe that's a week at most, maybe a week and a half to 2 weeks. This is something where it's a proprietary kind of application, it's custom made. There might be a little bit of PL SQL or a little bit of custom code, but it's nothing that can't be easily refactored. And then so on and so forth, where you go down to category 5, where it's something where it's non-portable, a lot of refactoring is gonna have to be done. I might have to throw out all of my existing code just because the person who wrote it all has left. Another way to kind of classify this, aside from the WQF, is this kind of hierarchy of simple versus complex. And simple is where you have a simple schema, maybe a few hundred objects. You have an ORM that's helping things along. You have an active dev and test team, versus complex, where you have multiple schemas, a lot of objects. You have hand-coded, custom, bespoke Perl or C code that's kind of underpinning your business operations. And the people who wrote this have left. And when you kind of figure out these kinds of quantifiable metrics, you can then kind of line them up in this way where you have tasks and the estimated level of effort in weeks. So for example, this is for WQF category 1, where it's a very simple workload. For category 2, things kind of jump out a little bit. And then for category 3, so on and so forth. And you'll see that the estimated level of effort blows up, right? Because it's not something that you can start on day 0 immediately. Things come in a sequence. Even though as much as we like to parallel workloads, things have to come in a series of events. And so when you're planning out your level of migration, your level of effort for your migration, you have to keep this kind of stuff in mind. And personally, I really hate doing those kinds of flowcharts and spreadsheets. It takes up a lot of time, oftentimes it's inaccurate, and it's a massive pain. So one thing that we did was we actually created this WQF module for SCT, where it helps you analyze that entire process, and it will build out that report for you, where it will estimate the level of effort, the number of days, your inventory report, all that kind of stuff I was talking about, where honestly, that would be frightening for me just to kind of think about going through all that effort just to just find out that my whole schedule was wrong. This will do it for you. So if you're interested, it's actually available as an AMI, open out the marketplace. So just give it a try. It's really interesting to use, and I found a lot of customers find it very helpful. And when you're using these kinds of tools, right, whether you use this generator or you just hand jam it yourself, you have to have a master plan, right? You have to figure out, okay, these are my lighter lift workloads, these are low-hanging fruit, and I want to start with those first. Because of that reason I told you before, you want that kind of flywheel of expertise to be built. And when you're doing this, right, oftentimes this is the case, you don't want to do just one, right? If you have 1,000 databases and you need to migrate by next year, you need to start right now. So you can start all your databases at once. I'm not saying that you can't start your heavy, fat ones initially, but what happens is that Team A is responsible for those light lift workloads, right? Where they will complete a migration within a week. And they keep doing that over and over. That's that yellow work stream. Team B has the kind of medium lift workloads, and Team C has the heavy, hard ones. And what is often useful is that you have Team A resources that can be matrixed out to Team B and to Team C to help spread their learnings, to help teach and guide, and maybe even come in as extra support when needed. What are some other ways AWS can help me accelerate my migration? So we have a bunch of different resources out there, right? I was talking about methodologies, I was talking about kind of tools and services, but overall, this is the kind of high-level view of what we offer. And this is all under what we call a migration acceleration program. And of this, even though I'm talking specifically about databases right now, those sessions that I showed you before will really help guide this kind of high-level migration path for you, right? Databases aren't in a vacuum. There's an application associated with the database. And while we're talking about databases here, there's a whole separate line of thinking when you're thinking about, okay, how do I migrate my applications over to AWS? How do I migrate my, say, virtual appliances over to AWS? So this entire resource here that you see helps you with that process of how do I holistically migrate all my resources over to the cloud? Database freedom. So who here has heard about database freedom? So database freedom is our initiative that we've basically been spearheading, where we want to focus on making, or rather freeing customers from old guard style databases where you're locked in, where you're kind of subject to really punitive licensing costs. And being able to move to an open source database really enables you to jump from database to database in a really free manner. And we have a bunch of ways to help you with that. So the tools I was talking about, right? DMS, SET, the managed database services we have, such as RDS, and the new optimized RDS instance types that we have, right? The R5s, the R5Ds, which come with NVMe, local storage, things like that, that really help address a lot of workload types that customers have. We also have professional services. I'm one of them. Partners and product teams that we can help connect you with to make things easier on your end. If you have questions, or if you have concerns, or if you have just trouble migrating your databases over to Amazon, we can help you with that. Migration playbooks, which I'll get into in a second, is actually really, really cool. And I'm really excited about it, but I'm going to wait just a little bit so I finish patterns and recommendations, which are also part of that. Proof of concepts, which are ways that we can kind of for let's say a fixed scope period, we can come in, show you how to migrate over, right, in a simple, repeatable way, and then leave you with the artifacts that we generated, such that you can take them and run with them so you can migrate your own workloads. We also hold workshops, and we also have various ways to give you credits and incentives to help get you going. So I was talking about playbooks. This is really, really useful. I have done so many migrations, and I made them so much faster just by using these playbooks. And what they are is really just this really fat PDF of guides and tips and tricks about how to migrate from various source systems to target systems, such as Oracle to Postgres, Oracle to MySQL, things like that. I mean, SQL Server to MySQL, things like that. They'll tell you, okay, is there a compatible feature within RDS that I can use that I am dependent on? If there's not, what's my workaround for it? Things like that. Very useful. If you're looking at a migration today, or if you're looking at a migration in the future, take a look at these playbooks because they are essential. We also have a series of database partners that can help you in case that you need to go, especially if you're in the government, you need to go through some sort of prime. Take a look at these. They are very useful, they're very competent. And especially if you have licensing questions, which is especially common if you're dealing with old guard style databases. We have licensing advisory partners as well that can help you through this. So in closing, this is just a general kind of closing. We provide you a lot of services, right? They're purpose-built. If there's one thing I want you to take away from this is that you want to avoid one-size-fits-all solutions in lieu of a solution that is tailor-fit and kind of handmade, purpose-built for your application and your specific need, right? You can couple all these services together to make your application work just as the way you envisioned it before, but in a better and more scalable way. The way that you scale, right, in the cloud is not by having this kind of tightly coupled monolithic thing, but having these kinds of decoupled components that you can scale up, scale down, turn off at will. Managed, right, you want to think about how we take care of the undifferentiated heavy lifting for you. We take care of all that kind of stuff you don't care about, so you can focus on the things that actually matter to your business and mission. Open, where you got to, think about this kind of getting away from the old guard style of doing things and moving to these more open databases such as Postgres and MySQL. And keep in mind, you can always come to us and help us give kind of guidance to our roadmap, right? If you have a feature need, or you have a migration that's coming up that you really need something fixed or corrected, or some sort of mitigation in RDS, let us know, because we are customer obsessed. We'll try our best to make that happen for you. So for some migration best practices, right? You don't want to assume everything will just work after running the tools once. That's a terrible thing to do. People will try to sell it to you that, oh, my service or my tool will make life, with the click of a button, your data will be migrated. Reality is quite much more tragic than that. What is often the case is that even though DMS and SCT are awesome tools, things will come up. You will run into issues. And anyone who tells you that I can migrate your database in a week without any issues doesn't have enough experience in the field. You want to understand your source target data. You want to figure out the complexities of your data. You want to figure out how clean your data is. If your data is 99% clean, but you have some data that you know in there is not conformant to the schema that you anticipate, you're going to run into issues when you're migrating, because your DMS flow will pump 99% of your data over and then throw up at the last minute because, oh no, this data thing is not compatible with the target data type, what's going on. And it'll be very hard for you to debug this if you don't understand your data very well. You want to plan your migrations just like a development project. You want to take an agile methodology. You want to be able to iterate repeatedly. You want to be able to test. You want to be able to experiment, because this is the way that you gain experience. You want to avoid taking that kind of waterfall-y approach as much as you can, because you can't take advantage of the learnings that you got from your past migrations if you try to do it all in one shot. You want to be able to be prepared to test your migration strategy and iterate quickly, right? So I talked about how important it is to gain experience, but you also need to have a way to test, right? It's not enough to say the number of records match, right? That's not a valid way to say it migrated successfully. You have to be able to spot test, you have to be able to sample, you need to be able to hook up your existing application to the new database and say things are going well. It's really important to test, because you'll find out that if you leave all your testing until the end, you're going to run into a lot of pain, because you might find out that something broke down in the middle of the line that you now need to invest 4 to 5 weeks to fix. You also wanted to find a comprehensive set of KPIs, key performance indicators. How fast was my database running on-prem? How fast is my target SLA? Do I actually need to hit that target SLA? What happens if I experience failure, if my database goes down? Do I have a backup strategy? How long is the SLA for that backup to come back online? What's my DR strategy? Do I have a set number of miles for that DR strategy to be compliant? Things like that. You need to have these numbers in place when you first start the project, and you need to constantly go back and take a look at them again. Because the worst thing that you can do is find out that you did not hit the objective KPIs that you didn't define in the beginning, but you found out at the end that they were actually a hard requirement. Again, you can always ask for help from AWS. And please provide feedback on your experience so that we can improve on our tools and services and help you get going on your database journey. Here are some resources that you can take a look at. Various links, tips and tricks. Database Freedom is up there, as well as Database Migration Service. So we won't be taking questions here, even though I've allotted 10 minutes for it. So we'll be taking questions outside if you have any questions for me. Great, thank you for your time, and please complete the session survey for me. It really helps me out too.